So if you said, I have a dollar of revenue, but you're worth $10. That's a 10 times multiple of revenue, for example. But what was happening was it was becoming 30 times multiple for revenue. And so when that happens, revenue becomes far more valuable than profit, because you're like, forget the profit, just we're getting valued on revenue. So it's like hire as many salespeople as possible and scale it as fast as possible. And then we'll hopefully get profitability at some point in the future, but don't worry about it.
Good day, and welcome to another episode of the Cloud Gambit. With me is my co-host, Yvonne Sharp, the Swiss Army knife of human aspiration right here. How are you doing today, Yvonne?
I'm great. I just got back from some travel to New York City and meeting with teams and doing some fun and interesting stuff. For those who don't know, well, nobody's going to know. They wouldn't know. But William and I ended up on the same flight and had no idea. Like, I walked over and I'm like, hey, what are you doing here? And he's like, what? And so we were on the same flight. We hadn't even communicated about it, but it was good time.
Completely different reasons. Yeah, I was on a flight to for this AI for Network Leaders Summit that I was presenting at, and I'm sitting there looking at my never-ending line of emails, just kind of like stargazing, dazed out a little bit at the gate. And, hey, William, what are you doing here? And I was like, whoa, what are the chances? Same flight, going to the same place. It's a small world.
It's a small world.
Yeah, it was nice getting out of the humidity. And I think you were even talking about how good and not humid the weather was.
It was beautiful. Yeah, especially yesterday. It was like low 70s, and I got out a little bit, walked in Central Park, snuck out. And so that was nice. Yeah,
lovely.
It was good time. All right.
So we have a fantastic guest today, a guest who has this fascinating career arc in which I can't wait to dig in and ask some questions about. I think the listeners are going to love it. But welcome to the show, Michael. How are things going for you today?
I'm real good. And it would have been weird if you bumped into me on my flight. I'm in Australia at the moment, and tomorrow I leave for Spain. So I don't know if we might randomly bump into each other. We could have done it on that flight. This podcast.
Yeah, that's a lot of airtime.
It sure is.
How often do you spend over in Australia? Because you're from Brisbane.
I'm like this international citizen, it would seem. I was based in. Actually, I think you were saying you've got family over in near San Jose. I used to live in Los Gatos, so for 5 years lived there. And Megaport is actually founded in Brisbane, Australia. So our head office is in Brisbane. So I spent a lot of time in Brisbane. And then I spent a lot of time back in the US, which is where 60% of our business is. And then we're in 26 countries. So then I spend time in those other countries. And we're constantly launching new countries. And so, lots and lots of travel time as we sort of continue to expand. Most recently, we launched in Brazil, which is really cool. And it turns out that Brazil is a long way from everywhere. It's even a long way from the US, it would seem. Even though it's in, South America, you'd think it's actually be nice and close. So lots of travel, great company, and all over the show.
Awesome. I'm always a fan, I would say, of a good origin story, whether it's superheroes or technology, real life, science fiction. Origin stories are awesome. They kind of reveal, like in our world, kind of how leaders think and how they make decisions, which is, I'm a huge fan of trying to learn from what others do so I can maybe get to something a little bit quicker and not fall in, some of the same sand traps, of course. But something that's pretty fascinating is, you originally, I think, studied aerospace engineering at Queensland University of Technology. So obviously it would pique one's interest. How does someone go from, I don't know if building rockets was one of your aspirations, but going from that space to a massive network as a service provider focused on this like software-defined networking? How did that happen?
I knew at high school that was the path I must take. I must be the CEO of a network as a service company, and the natural choice was to become an aerospace engineer. That's I can you were saying before, it sort of showing some insight into the planning or the vision or what have you of someone. I would say that I didn't have a lot of that. I would say I did pretty well at school, high school, and then I was sort of had this opportunity to choose. I think it was in the top 1% of the country or whatever it was in terms. So you get to choose anything, and one of the hardest things, to give a teenager is unlimited choice, because actually it would just be easier if someone told you what you should do. And so then I thought, I sort of went through all these choices for university, and I guess just before the internet would probably have told me the right answer to that, and just sort of flicked through and picked the hardest to get into courses, and then pulled it back to what was, highly, would favor mathematics, which is sort of something I really enjoyed. I ended up with two options, which was an actuary or aerospace engineering. And I was like, the aerospace sounds way cooler. I'm pretty sure that's going to be much more fun. And I thought, well, in that case, I could, build some rockets, go to NASA and do something awesome, always be fascinated in that space. So that was kind of the thought process. It wasn't much more thought than that. What I didn't realize, and if I, rewound time, you should have gone to the purpose of the degree itself, which would ultimately be getting the job. And what I should have realized is that there's actually no jobs in Australia in aerospace, and they're all in the US. And actually, while I was at university, Twin Towers occurred, and then aerospace became a secret clearance job. So if you wanted to work, and even to this day, if you want to work for SpaceX, you need to have the appropriate clearance, and you needed to be a US citizen to get that. So in short, I did a degree with absolutely zero job prospects at the end of it. So I thought I was pretty clever going into that, and probably thought at the end that wasn't the smartest decision. And then, of course, when you do something technical, it's a really easy path to get to IT. So, aerospace was a lot of coding, a lot of sort of understanding really, really complex things, and technology is very similar. And so that's sort of how a lot of us, I think, back in the day ended up in tech. And these days, there's a lot of, you do a course to get into tech. There's a lot of, it's certainly changed. And I landed at a company that did a whole heap of, in the early days was like PBX. And so if you remember phone systems that were transiting to IP telephony, so IPtel came into the market and used to be NEC, then Cisco sort of invented this IPtel space, and then you needed switches to connect to that. And after a few years in that space, I ended up doing all my CCNA, CCDA, CC every something, because the company that I worked for needed these Cisco certifications. And so I had no idea what a Cisco certification was. But I had this crazy boss who walked through the office and goes, "Didn't we just hire some rocket scientists? Can you get that guy to go and do these certifications so that we can get these Cisco things, and then we're going to go and list on the IPO?" So I was like, I don't know. I finished university pretty young. I was probably like 19 or something like that, and he's sort of running around going, "Go and get these certs." So off I went and got all these Cisco certs, having never heard of Cisco. And then because of that, I then learned all this networking space, and then I ended up a few years later working for Cisco. And I was at Cisco for 15 years and did a whole range of things, like a really broad set of roles. I don't know how much more you want me to go into, or if you want me to sort of keep giving you the X-Men origin story, or how
you spent how long were you at Cisco? Like almost 20 years or something, right? Like a pretty long
15 years, yes. I joined there. I joined Cisco in 2008, and interesting time because the market was collapsing. If you remember, it was like the financial crisis that occurred, and I joined there. I think it was in April, and I think by September the whole world was pretty much, laying everyone off. So I didn't think I'd last long there, but made it through that, and I ended up running banking and finance customers more as a go-to-market in the go-to-market space, and then I ran the northern region of Australia, and then I moved to the US. Into Los Gatos, or actually to San Jose, to the head office. And I did a really random pivot. I ended up acquiring companies for Cisco, which was something that I had zero experience in. But it ended up acquiring 6 different companies into the business. And then I had an opportunity to actually run and scale those companies inside Cisco. So yeah, a whole range. You might have, the last one that I worked out, which we acquired and scale, was a company called ThousandEyes, which you're probably familiar with. Yeah, really cool tech, phenomenal company, wicked founders, all based in San Francisco and the Bay Area. So we acquired that company in COVID, actually, in 2020. They were growing at a rate of knots, but they were pretty small. They were, at the time, I think 74 million in annual recurring revenue. I think they had 300 people in the whole company. And then we just scaled this thing. I think we hired something like 300 people in a year and scaled it through that sort of, if you recall back in the time, it was like, what was it? The great resignation. Everyone was quitting and finding new jobs, and sort of the job market was exploding. So we ended up hiring sort of 300 people in that time. And then it continued. I think we ended up with 1,000 people in the business, and got to scale that company. It was already global, but we sort of poured gas on that fire and exploded globally. And the growth was just astronomical. Sometimes you have these acquisitions that just fit perfectly inside a company, and who would have believed it? But network monitoring in the world's biggest network company was a really great fit, and all customers benefited from the product. And so what we saw was, I think we had 500 customers when we were acquired, and by the end of it, there was just thousands and thousands. It just exploded. So that was the last sort of piece of the puzzle at Cisco before I joined Megaport.
ThousandEyes was a fascinating company because I was actually a customer of them, because I worked on the enterprise for like over almost 15 years before I started doing the startup thing. But yeah, one of the statistics I wrote down was that I guess you grew ARR to 2.4 times the original value post acquisition, which, I mean, is really, especially at that time, is like really incredible for a software as a service company. And being that ThousandEyes was like they were very early adopters of, software as a service, really driving, showing what the market could be for networking there. Did that experience, I'm sure it taught you a ton about this new and different software by consumption driven market model, pricing, sales, like everything really sort of changed to, from the traditional CapEx, 6-year, 8-year investment cycles that most companies were kind of used to. I'm guessing that taught you a ton about how to build a successful SaaS company.
Yeah, Cisco has a huge amount of different products. Some of them, or 90, I think a very high percentage, I would say, is traditionally was hardware. So if you think of routing, switching, wireless, etc., it's a physical device. And then what happened is when Meraki came into Cisco, they really decoupled this sort of physical and then this software element. And then what was interesting was the software was as a service, and then the hardware got deployed by the software. So it was a real decoupling of both hardware and software. And that was probably the first big transition that Cisco went through. There are lots of other acquisitions and software stacks that Cisco had acquired. AppDynamics was a great example. Duo was a great example. Another great example, WebEx was the original, probably as a service. So at my time at Cisco, I had a whole range of different sort of SaaS style experiences. And prior to ThousandEyes, I also ran a company called Jasper, which was another acquisition that Cisco made, which is all as a service as well. So I'd had all these different sort of SaaS style experiences. What was unique about ThousandEyes, which kind of set me up for the role that I'm in now, and in a really, I think from a capability perspective, was we started with this 74 million in ARR, but a global business, and scaling it very fast upwards and to the right. And it was all as a service. And you had to think about how you deploy people and go to market, in which countries, and how to launch, etc. So Megaport is actually really similar. We're larger now in terms of ARR, but when I joined, we were probably around the $100 million US mark in ARR. And we've kind of exploded up in the last 2.5 years since I've been here. And I got to open a whole range of new markets. We got to expand the team, particularly in North America. Most of our revenue comes from the US. And it's in a very similar size and sort of shape to what ThousandEyes was, actually, in terms of it sells to a similar, like Megaport and ThousandEyes sell to a similar customer base, pretty much the same buying center, their network buying centers. and they're distributed in a very similar fashion. So if you think about it, the way in which you put go-to-market, if you think of a recurring revenue business, the purpose of a recurring revenue business is to make sure that it's recurring. And so there's a lot of companies out there that would sell a service, but at the end of the service, when it comes up for renewal, if it wasn't adopted, no one would, re-sign. It's like Netflix. If you never watch it, you're probably not going to pay for it again. So this whole concept of not only you have to sell, but then you have to make sure that it's been adopted and that the customers love it and the value is shown. And then you need to look after that customer, and then you earn the right to actually call it recurring revenue, and then it recurs. And when it recurs, then you can just basically stack revenue on top of each other each year, and you basically build this, giant machine that just keeps adding. And when it looks like, a line that just goes up and to the right from a revenue perspective. But to do that, you have to create great tech. You have to support it. Customers need to love it. It needs to work really, really well. So I think that experience with ThousandEyes led really nicely into Megaport, actually. It was something that I had a lot of experience with. I'd just done it. I done something similar. So I've kind of repeated what we did at ThousandEyes from a go-to-market perspective. On the product is obviously different, but we've got a huge focus on innovation inside the product. And as long as you do those two pieces, you're going to have a successful company.
And I see a lot of folks on the sales engineering go-to-market side who've had experience in selling boxes and technology sales that really struggle when they move into a consumption-based business, right? Because they're used to I'm going to wine and dine the customer. I'm going to go meet with them during this, their buying cycle, which happens every 3, 5, 7 years. And then they don't need as much time and attention. And I think that the difference in a consumption-based business is that those customers always need attention, and you're constantly trying to drive consumption, additional revenue, and to stay connected with them in ways that are maybe different in a more of a hardware tech sales kind of a consumption model.
Totally. I mean, and if you look at hardware tech sales, typically the hardware that you're selling to a customer is usually pretty expensive. If you think of, it could be a $5 million deal or a $10 million deal or $30 million deals and plus. If you look at the big banks in the US or just some of the larger customers, when you go to refresh infrastructure, whatever that may be, it could be compute, storage, network, whatever, it's huge. It's usually one giant deal, and you can spend 2 or 3 years, whining and dining. And, I'm part of your sales process as a corporate Amex card, and you go to lunch and you've got plenty of time to build a relationship. Whereas a company like ours who we provide very small services all the way up to very large, you have to build the product in a way that it can be what you would call product-led growth becomes an element of the strategy. And that is where you can genuinely have a customer that finds Megaport, and let's say a really simple example. I need to connect from AWS to Azure and to Google GCP. And I need to do that at a very high speed with very low latency. And I need to be able to do that without running it through the internet, so it doesn't cost me a fortune. Well, if you've Googled through that, you would find Megaport's website. And actually, in about 20 minutes of just playing around with it, we see customers that have seen the product start playing with it, open an account in the portal, start deploying connectivity and put their credit card in, and then it's literally consumed and delivered. So that's at the very low end, or at the very sort of entry point. And at the other end, we still have, folks out there with a corporate Amex looking after our very large customers, but you've got everything in between. And what's really interesting about the software that we've built, basically the network is this huge network as a service platform. We have, in effect, basically selling physical infrastructure as a SaaS platform. And so when you procure a port from Megaport, clicked in a portal, it actually deploys a physical port, one port on a switch. And we've got 3,000 switches in 1,000 data centers. And then you have access to what is 6,000 pieces of fiber. but you only take the path that you need. And so what happens is with one click, you can deploy that. So it changes the mindset from going and taking some signing up a rack in a data center, putting some infrastructure in there, paying for that infrastructure, deploying the infrastructure, maintaining, managing, putting power into it, and then putting a GBIC in there and a fiber and all the rest of it, and then trying to connect all across the world. And so we can do all that in software because there's a hardware stack beneath it.
You said something that I got to ask about. It's the only other thing I actually wrote down, but I read this somewhere when I was doing my limited research, but I think you said 60 seconds to connect anywhere on our platform, not a single human involved. And I think if you think about why is this more important than ever, I guess, to think about now, especially as we transition to this AI enabled world, not only just for the internals of a given business, you want your business to be optimized and you want to be able to scale, but you also want that user experience. You want to be able to, provide that to your customers and pass that on so you're easier to use than the next one. And all that is predicated on, obviously you talked about having a good product, having product market fit and such, but also automation plays a huge role in all of this. So how do you view that?
Automation is actually the single most important factor for Megaport. It's the thing that actually allows Megaport to be what it is. It's the thing that differentiates us. It's the thing that's so difficult to copy as well. And so there's actually really no other network as a service platform that does what we do. We live across 1,000 data centers, 120 different data center companies. And then we have this, like I said before, 3,000 physical switches. We have 6,000 pieces of fiber that are stitched into those switches. Each one is diverse and never crosses the other. We have subsea cable diversity up to sort of 5 different paths across every location. And then on top of that, you have this software element that just instantaneously deploys the network. Now, the interesting thing is the only way that we could ever make that work. We're a small company in terms of number of headcount, but we're the largest global network, we think, on the planet. And if you think of a traditional telco and how they manage their existing networks, it usually comes with thousands and thousands of people to make those changes. Now, we're getting old now. We're sort of 13 years old, but we had this belief back then that automation would be critical. Now, you said it's becoming more and more critical, but we've actually been doing it for a while. We did it for the clouds. What was happening was this requirement to get from a data center to a cloud, between the clouds. And there was this need to do it fast and always changing. You had this requirement to go, if you look at Google coming into the cloud space, let's say someone was already in AWS, but you now needed to move across. You needed to do that quickly and fast, or you might have wanted to run some in this cloud, some in that cloud, so now you needed a private connection between it. And it was constantly changing. And so imagine calling a telco, waiting for a connection. 3 months later, you finally get it connected. By that stage, the dev team's already changed what they're doing. And so what Megaport would allow you to do is not only deploy it in 60 seconds because it's automated, but we went to the next level, which is very strong in Terraform. And a lot of DevOps now just literally deploy Megaport without even touching a portal. It's actually completely delivered via Terraform. And I think there's something like 3.5 million downloads, probably more than that now, but of the Terraform code to do that. So you said it's important. It's so important. It's actually the only reason we exist is automation. And the other thing I'll say is it's funny because we hire network engineers and they come into Megaport, and of course they've got experience, which means they've been, running big networks somewhere else. And the first thing they do is they say, how do I log in and make the changes to this network? And the answer is actually, you can't. You have to recode the software and enable that to deploy and make the changes into the network. And because of that discipline, the automation remains exactly the same across that entire network. So we have something like 30,000 customer connections, and more than that are changing every second to every location. So if you think of 1,000 locations plus all the customers that we then have on that, which is probably another couple of thousand, 3,000, so call that 4,000 permutated, as in where they could connect and changing constantly, you can't actually deliver it without automation. It just wouldn't be possible. So it's rare, very, very rare to find.
One of the things we talked about earlier, your personal story and then your varied experiences. So in GTM roles, we always end up talking about, how much technical background do folks need to be able to effectively lead a technical organization, especially on the GTM side of things. And of course, now you're CEO, so you have responsibility for all of it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, what you've seen, because you have this, foundational engineering background. But then also like your work experience has exposed you to a lot of the GTM aspects. And I also see engineers struggling to make the leap, right?
Yeah.
To go from engineering, but then also understand the sales, go to market parts of the business. Could you talk about what that was like a little bit for you, and any guidance that you would have for folks that are technical but want to expand?
I think, I think the good thing is if you are a technical person, from an engineering background, the only other element you really need if you want to progress into more of a go-to-market focus with that, i.e. a solution architect or a frontline salesperson or a technical solution specialist that would design something, the only additional piece you need, because already you're passionate about tech, I would assume, the only additional piece that you need is communication. And so if you can communicate, some folks can't, some folks do not like communicating with humans and just want to live in code, and that's fine. But the folks that are passionate and actually technically great who can communicate is the perfect fit for a move into that space. And if you find it, I think the best technical folks are not really selling you something. They're usually getting on the phone with you and trying to figure out how they solve your problem technically with the products that they have. And in most cases, the products that they have, because they're so passionate about them, they're going to understand how to build that in a way that's going to solve what you do. And then if they can articulate that to you well and show you, then you will enjoy it on the other side and you will work with them to solve it. And that's where you've got to make sure that the product market fits right. So if you had a really technical person representing a product that doesn't solve your problem, it doesn't win. So you've got to have a great product as your foundation and constantly innovating on that product. Then you've got to have a person who can articulate or at least showcase the product ideally to the customer. And we have this for certain products at Megaport. It actually sells itself. And so that's where you've got this product-led growth or human-led. A human-led is typically much more either complex solutions or larger solutions or more riskier solutions where a customer really wants to be handheld through the process. So that would be the process there. On the product side, what I find interesting is if you listen to your customers really intently, I think great engineering and product management have a very great relationship with their customers. And I find the easiest way to figure out what you should be building, and this goes for kind of any company probably, is just to listen to what your customers are telling you, and they will pretty much build your roadmap for tech. They will build your features, what new products they want. Sometimes you need to take a leap with them because they aren't going to take the leap for you. They're not going to say to you, hey, Megaport, we think you should get into the security space for networking, as an example. So in some cases, you need to lead them down that path, and you need to understand that actually the product we could build is going to actually solve the customer problem, and it makes sense for them, because they won't often turn up to you and say, hey, Megaport, why don't you just build ThousandEyes? They're not thinking like that. What they're thinking is, hey, we use you to connect between these clouds. Could you connect to this one? Or we need jumbo frames, or we need encryption across it, or we need more locations, or I need 100 gig, or hey, wouldn't it be good if you had internet? And then wouldn't it be good if you had DDoS? You know what I mean? And so there's your product roadmap right there,
That's great.
I imagine, being just kind of your history where you're CEO of of Megaport, you probably have a positive view on multi-cloud. I just have to go kind of back in the, whatever they say, the Wayback Machine. And I remember when cloud first started to really explode, and I worked for a pretty large company. And when I started at this company, we were one cloud deep. We had AWS. That's all we had going on, and life was very simple.
Yeah.
By the time I left this company, we were 4 clouds deep.
Yeah.
And it was, to say things were fragmented and complicated was not giving it justice. It was pretty intense, but I also learned more. I thought I thought I knew networking very well. And I think SD-WAN was one area that taught me, kind of brought me back to reality. Like, you don't know networking as good as you think you do, William, because you have this underlay and overlay thing, and problems in the underlay are causing these weird things in the overlay. You have this loop or something going on, and you really have to know at a fundamental nuts and bolts level, networking in general, but also the network that you're working on. And so kind of the same realization with some of the, I guess, limitations across various cloud providers. Like maybe this one allows this many routes here, maybe this other one doesn't. Like they're just kind of all different, and that goes into your design and how you have to think about the future. But like seeing the way that some of these organizations got to multi-cloud, it's kind of something that I don't want to say is completely unavoidable, but kind of unavoidable. So like, what's your take on the multi-cloud future? Is it going to be, hey, we're going to button down and centralize around a single cloud, or we're going to have like a primary cloud and, other clouds that are providing other roles, or what does that look like in your mind?
Yeah. I think IT is constantly touting that we're making things simpler for everyone. And it seems to get significantly more complex. So I think if IT is genuinely trying to make everything simpler, we're all failing because everything's getting far more complicated. The cloud itself, like you said it, 10 years ago, a lot of companies came out and said, we are cloud first, and we are with AWS with one cloud, and we're going to be one cloud provider. And then along came Microsoft and basically signed a big Microsoft renewal with that company. And then along came a big cloud migration, or at least 50-50 of their cloud. And then Google entered the space, and they were doing some really cool stuff actually in with different applications in the early stages. And so you would choose to go to Google for certain application types because it made a lot more sense inside their platform. And then they expanded their platform. And then they were also great. I mean, we're a Google shop here at Megaport. So all of the Google suite would also, for a lot of startups that were growing bigger and bigger, they're all Google suite. So then it made sense to be that space. So now you had these 3 clouds, and then along came Oracle, and Oracle goes, well, hey, you've got our databases, and you've got a choice. You can either keep running it on premise, it gets expensive, or you can put it in our cloud, but it's our cloud, not their cloud. So now what you ended up with was a start with AWS, and a move to Microsoft because of your licensing. Google had some cool stuff, and now you got Oracle. And kind of, we thought that's probably where it was going to stay for a while. However, what you're seeing today is a lot of neo clouds exploding out of nowhere. Lots of them. Like we did 2 press announcements, I think this week, one yesterday, for another AI company that's joined our AI exchange. And these are companies that are in some small way supported by NVIDIA to build out GPU chips in data centers and add cloud-like services to customers who need access to GPU chips. And the funny part is, it's like, why aren't the cloud providers doing that? And the answer is they are. But if you look at it, the clouds will be quite heavily competing at some point with NVIDIA. So at the same time, NVIDIA is supporting this massive fracturing of what is this market where clouds traditionally bought infrastructure and sold it back to the customer as a virtualized layer across it. And if you think of NVIDIA, to de-risk their future, whilst they're so dominant today, there is a foreseeable point in the future where newer chips come out or are manufactured by the cloud providers that then change the requirement of buying NVIDIA chips. So if you look at Jensen's putting a lot of support into these neo clouds, they are popping up everywhere. As I said, we've got 36 on the platform. So now we've gone from what was 4 sort of major clouds to another, probably 36 and beyond, neoclouds, companies like CoreWeave and Lambdas and there's a million of them. And so there's some really cool ones coming out and they're all doing different things. And last thing I'll say is on that is you've got this requirement now for sovereign. A lot of outside of the United States, there's a lot of sovereign requirements. If you look at France, when I did that French interview with Raphael, it's like there was a GPU company there that all they did was bought a whole heap of NVIDIA chips, stuck them in a data center because the French government wants sovereign AI power and they don't want anything to leave the country. It's happening kind of everywhere. So now it's getting more fractured. And the last thing I guess I'll add, I thought, I had another last, but that was you've got companies that are also realizing that there's particular types of workloads that they should be optimizing for physical infrastructure in their own data centers. And so what was this move from on-premise to colo data centers to cloud, now fracturing of clouds and GPU, and then all of a sudden there's actually there's a lot of workloads that make sense on-premise. So that's great for us because we just sit there and we're like, we offer you choice, instantaneous, incredible private speed to wherever you want to go in 60 seconds. And so when you're doing all these different things, we become this sort of easy button to connect them all together. So it's good for our business, but it's not easy if you're trying to simplify things.
Yeah, there seems to be like this massive upheaval of sorts with data center. Well, I mean, really everything at the end of the day, but you have like the hyperscalers. I think one of the reasons like the big cloud providers, they scaled up with commodity infrastructure and designed based around like, I don't know, like 300 watt CPUs in mind. I don't really know, something like that. Yeah. And this had to shift to like 1,000 watt plus, per each accelerator. So if we're talking like H100s, and that means the rack density for all the things required here, like they basically had to completely take this beautiful, abstracted, commoditized design and like rip it up and really put in a lot of investment to replace things, and probably like deploying new data centers based on proximity to power sources, because power is such a major problem to tackle. I mean, that's a good point. Like, how does network providers, like just thinking in the future, all these network providers you have, whether they're completely hardware based or abstracted on hardware, how do they navigate things when the physical infrastructure is so constrained based on power, really? I don't know if you have any thoughts there, but I'd be interested to.
Yeah, I mean, we're in this space which has become the hottest space probably ever. Like, AI is absolutely booming, as we all know. But what we know, what that has led to is that NVIDIA is booming because they create the thing that creates AI, which is the GPUs. But then you go, well, we've got to stick these things somewhere, and that is a data center. So then the data centers are booming. But as you pointed out, they're putting 150 kilowatts into a rack. It's like they're putting so much power density into a rack that the thing's going to melt a hole in the floor. So then the next thing became, well, got to get enough power to that rack. And then subsequently, whatever's consuming power is, all it's doing is creating heat, and that heat needs to then be cooled. And so what you've seen now is, to your point, what we did was actually pretty rudimentary for data centers. We just threw coolish air in there, and we literally have fans that blast it through the hardware devices and keep it cool, and then we suck it out the back and we just cycle it through. And that's your air-cooled data center, and that's all we've ever needed because we've never really required something to deal with much more heat than that. And today what you're seeing is a lot of those data centers are either being custom built for water-cooled, and so this liquid cooling, ideally to the chip in most instances. So what you're seeing is a lot of these racks now, if you look at them, there's a lot of plumbing pipes that run, like you've got a power that comes into the rack, and then you've got a plumbing pipe that comes in that is water that then gets literally cycled through the system and then back out with a heat exchanger. So now what you're seeing is massive rebuilds of how the data centers operate just to cool the things that we've got to get in them. So there's lots of change. With network, it doesn't change in that. The funny thing about Megaport is, a switch consumes very little, very, very small amounts of power. Fiber consumes almost no power because it's physically pushing light down it. So the network component is not constrained at all in any way by this change. But what is the constraint is that the data centers are getting built in random locations. And so what's the challenge with the random location to access power means that you probably don't have fiber. And so now you need to get fiber hauled out to these locations. So let's say you found a block of land, large, very large, and it's close to some power or power gen or maybe transformers or whatever. Yes, that's cool. But now you got to go and bring in some fiber from somewhere. So it's probably the last thing they think about. and so then, yeah, that's the last piece of the puzzle, is just making sure they don't build islands. They've got to connect them. So it's back to what made networking cool in the first place. Like, if you remember it, like in the early 2000s or leading up to the, in the 90s, with the boom of all the fiber connection, it's still the same. We still are totally reliant on fiber optic cables globally.
One of the things I think about a lot these days is for the average folks out there who are either cloud engineers, they're working in IT, even maybe at a vendor. Just the signal to the noise ratio is so low. There's so much noise. It's really hard to suss out the signal. And there's so much hype around AI. I think most people believe that that it's going to be with us forever. It's going to make some big changes, but we don't know exactly what and where yet.
Yes.
How do you recommend folks try and determine, how to find the signal in that noise so that they know how to navigate either their future or their organization's future, their team's future? Like, it's very difficult these days.
Yes. It's super difficult. I don't know if I have the best answer. I actually think what we're doing right now, which is podcasts with interesting people that have got experience in different spaces, and trying to follow the ones, or at least, more of your podcasts, more of other people who are in this space, and just hear what the genuine story is. You got to make sure they're not just giving you all the hype buzz. Like, I'm the CEO of a publicly traded company. I can't tell you how often our shareholders are like, "What is the AI thing? And what are you doing with that?" And I'm very realistic with it. I give them sort of the viewpoints from more of a lens that actually what's happening right now is that AI is fueling an investment wave in IT. It's not necessarily an investment wave in AI in many cases. It's just an investment wave where they get to, like, I'll give you a really interesting example of this. The chair of the board comes in and says, "Whoa, this AI thing's hot. It's a risk for the company. If we don't get it right and our competitor does, we could be taken out." Now, it doesn't matter what company this is or what risk it is, they're saying that. So the board goes, yeah. CEO, what are you doing about AI? And the CEO walks down to their, CIO, the information officer, and says, "Hey, what are we doing with AI?" And, she says, I haven't been allowed to spend a cent for the last 4 years since COVID. What do you mean doing with AI? I haven't even upgraded the network. Like, we don't even have Wi-Fi down, and so then they go, "Well, geez, you got to get onto this thing." And so they release the purse strings. The CFO says, "Go and spend and get things built and get it better." And the first thing they do, go and buy some more network, upgrade their compute stack, they put some better security, and then they go, "Okay, right, now I'm going to go build some AI." And the question is, they don't know what then
to do what?
To do what?
To do what?
Exactly. And so what happens is we will all benefit from that wave. That's the first thing. The second thing, though, is like the noise, and that's how the hell do you decipher the signal and the noise component? And the signal is follow the money, I think, is the easiest one. And if you can see it, like ChatGPT, I think it was at $1 billion in ARR at the start of the year. It's at $5 billion today. Like, it is exploding. So ChatGPT is definitely a beneficiary of that. And we all know that. So yeah, everyone's like, yeah, we know that signal. But the next thing, what's happening is a lot of the agentic AI, a lot of the companies that have got SaaS platforms that have finally figured out how to stuff AI in these SaaS platforms and actually add value back to customers. And companies like Canva, or, you jump on Canva and you want to design an image. Well, AI is really good at that. but you need to make it really fast. And so it needs to speed up how quickly it can deliver that. And so now what you're seeing is, okay, like the signal and the noise piece, finally we're seeing customers relying on this thing called inference, and inference is kind of this next wave. So there's been a lot of talk about training, and then this, well, at some point we're going to have inference. This year, in the last sort of, I'd say 6 months, we're finally seeing inference really starting to take hold. And inference is, simply put, training a model is where they put all those GPUs in one data center and they get a model. When we interface with it, that's really inference. And it's the inference. When inference takes off, it means that AI is genuinely servicing someone to do something. Like you were just saying, like to do what? It's like something is being done here in inference. And in the last 6 months, we've seen, there's a customer of ours who's one of the largest inference companies on the planet who built out a global cloud on our backbone in less than 4 months. And they're pumping chips all over the world to literally make that Canva experience quicker, as an example, or your AI help desk call that was much faster to respond. And so we're finally seeing it play out in different software platforms, and that I think is follow the signal and noise, follow the money, and where the money's been invested, and figure out where that is. And I think right now it's pretty easy to say data centers are hot. NVIDIA chips are hot. The next one's inference chips are hot. But the SaaS providers that have figured it out, they will be hot for the next forever. Like it's always going to be it's just a part of our lives now in some way, shape, or form. Don't know if that helped.
Really helpful. No, it's, yeah. I just messaged William. That's a great answer. So it's very helpful.
I had a few, I was going to interject and have a few questions, but you actually answered and then added more to everything I was going to ask. So thank you.
No worries. One podcast I find helpful is All In Podcast, as if you've ever come across it. It gets a bit political at the moment, but I guess everything's political at the moment. But I find them helpful because they quite often break down the genuine trends, and they get some data and they actually sort of showcase it through. That's helpful, I think, just to keep it like a pulse on it, like a genuine pulse, not like a hypey pulse, just a real pulse.
Yeah, I think their main moderator, Mr. Calacanis, has another podcast as well, This Week in Startups, which I started because I'm very interested in the startup space, because you're kind of talking about signals and noise and everything, where money's going. And like, if you're in this industry for long enough, you see, okay, VCs and whoever, they inject capital into all these startups, and then you see sort of the life cycle of these startups, and then you start to see how these things make it into the public markets, and they do a pretty good job of breaking down those early stage startups and tactical business and such. But yeah, we'll link both of those in the show notes. Thanks for the recommendation there.
The VC space is super exciting. So if you like startups have had a bit of a tough run, actually. They had a huge bull run for sort of 12 years leading up to COVID, actually really successful. Then COVID, a massive explosion. In fact, like ThousandEyes, we bought them just in 2020, when everything's exploding. And then, as you know, sort of back end towards 2022, it was a massive crash and everything came reversing back down. So it went from sort of 0% interest rates, which everything skyrocketed. The challenge was anyone who raised money during that time raised at valuations that were just not logical. That actually did a huge amount of damage to the VC and to the startup ecosystem. It made a lot of founders' stock worthless. It made a lot of people who'd sort of taken options and hitched their heart to these companies. It actually diluted all of their positions, made them worthless. In some cases, then they all left, and that companies are really just an amalgamation of great talent. So when they all leave, then the companies fail. So there's actually a really tough ride. And even we were a company that went through that transition. A lot of companies didn't make it out. And during the time, we actually looked at acquiring a lot of different companies. So we were always looking to acquire these different businesses, different VC-backed or PE-backed, whatever it may be. And you just couldn't buy them. They couldn't get to a price point that their shareholders could accept because of where they were at, or the product was no longer workable because everyone had left. But in the last year, it's starting to come back. And it's come back really, really fast, because what you've seen is companies that were founded in sort of 2020, 2021, hadn't raised silly money, are coming into their own now. And you're starting to see them explode and move quicker, way quicker than ever before because of AI coding. So they need a lot less people and they're moving a lot faster. And what we're also finding is that there's a lot less VC dilution. So there's a lot of founders who have much higher percentages of the company that they own. And that's really important because they are willing to sell a little earlier. For example, if you had 10% of the company and it's worth $1 billion, you get 100 million of that. That's a lot of money. But if you had 50% of the company, you know what I mean? You can sell for significantly less and still make a lot of money. And so that's where it's like that dynamic has played out. It played out because VCs weren't investing and then founders were bootstrapping and now all this AI. So just a much better dynamic. And I think you'll see that play out for the next I think you'll be back for a bull run for at least 3 to 4 years, maybe longer. And you're starting to see that in IPO markets. It's an interesting, right now is really, really, it's a great time. I think it's a much better time, particularly for startups than it was sort of 3 years ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah. I have one more question and I'm done. I just got to ask. You kind of led into it pretty nicely, but the free money era, when there was so much capital all at once getting pumped into these startups, do you feel that led to this whole growth at all costs? Because VCs want to recoup their investment, and there's so much pressure to, hey, you got to perform, you need to hire more sales, more product, you need to do more features, you need to expand out of your core value proposition that had product market fit and, go in this area and that area. And you're an AI company now as well too. So
yeah,
there's so much pressure to do it all at once, so fast. And then it seems like things kind of begin to go off the rails a little bit there.
It was a massive derailing. There was probably the biggest derailing I've ever seen. I hope we never see it again. And it was predicated on, a global pandemic that hopefully we never see again either. And it was just so extreme in terms of how we reacted to solve for the pandemic. And that is, as soon as interest rates went to zero, it probably kept people alive, frankly, because, the people were losing jobs. It was a lot of things. The problem was valuations just skyrocketed. And what happens very, very quickly when you have a high multiple. So, by the way, I spent a lot of time talking about this with shareholders just recently because it's changed again. And so in the last, if you run this sort of scenario, in 1999, it was the back end of a 12-year bull run in VC, and it was still a growth at all cost mentality. And the reason it was because what was happening, to your point, was you had this valuation to revenue. So if you said, I have a dollar of revenue, but you're worth $10. That's a 10 times multiple of revenue, for example. But what was happening was it was becoming 30 times multiple for revenue. And so when that happens, revenue becomes far more valuable than profit, because you're like, forget the profit, just we're getting valued on revenue. So it's like hire as many salespeople as possible and scale it as fast as possible. And then we'll hopefully get profitability at some point in the future, but don't worry about it. So then that leads to this next thing where they burn the money and they run out, so they have to raise the money. There was a period where that was fine. Burn, raise, growth at all costs, blah, 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 blah. And then when it hits COVID, it was way more capital and then everything got hyper raised, but it handbraked really, really quickly. So the market went from growth at all cost and then it handbraked, and then it became cash flow was the key. And so you had all these metrics change. You had this rule of 40, then it became rule of 40 EBITDA, then it was rule of 40 free cash flow. And then what happened is everyone came in, company like CEOs were demanded, get profitability back. So rule of 40 was this mix of, great example, if you had 10% profitability and 30% growth, you had 40. Add those two together and that was your rule of 40. You could have 39% profitability and 1% growth, and you can still hit rule of 40. And the problem was, what's really easy if you're a CFO is you can hit rule of 40 tomorrow by firing the entire sales team. and you'll keep your revenue coming, and now you're highly profitable. And then they go, woohoo, we're rule of 40. And then 6 months goes by and the board comes in and goes, where's all your growth? Where's all your customers? What's happening? You're profitable, but no growth. And then they go, yeah, we've got no salespeople. And then they go, whoa, that's a problem. So then they come out with this thing called rule of X. I don't know if you heard of it. And this is where they go, no, we're going to multiply your growth by 3 and your profit by 1. And so what you would say is you've got 20% growth of 20% profitability and 20% growth, and your 20% gets multiplied by 3, and then that becomes your rule of X. This is the new rule. Now, we have been in this is in the last 4 years, we've had 4 different rules. And right now we're at a new stage, and this is where it's a little bit peaky right now. If you look at Cloudflare's valuation as a really good example, I think they're 30x. Maybe you have to check, but we're something like 8 times revenue. There's something like 30 times revenue. When you get back to this point, Cloudflare's in that stage right now. We're an incredible company, by the way, but the point is they've exploded from a valuation perspective. Their answer becomes grow revenue as fast as possible because it's worth 30 times. So the natural answer is higher, 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 raise, raise, raise. And we go back to a scenario where we're in this growth at all cost mentality. Now, Cloudflare is different because they're public and they got plenty of cash. They're in a different position. But my point is, when Cloudflare becomes 30x, it means their VCs will value their companies at the same multiples. And then so we're actually in the same process that we started with. We're like heading back to this thing. Hopefully we've learned a bit of a lesson to say, grow fast, but do it profitably. And in fact, what Megaport went to market this year, we said we've got so much opportunity for growth. And we said we're going to actually dip into our profitability to actually invest more for growth. And in effect, we said, well, what's the limit? And the limit for us was we said we'd be cash flow break even and we would grow the rest. And so in effect, what that means is we don't dip into cash reserves. So we don't have to raise, and we're not at risk of losing money. So we've got $100 million in cash in the bank. And by the end of the year, we'll still have $100 million in cash in the bank, but we would have invested that in growth. So for me, I feel that's a safe bet because you don't get in a position where you have to raise. And if you choose to turn off the machine, instead of cutting staff, next year you just don't hire as many staff, and it writes itself automatically because you're a growing company. So I'm just sort of giving you some financial metric thinking that the world's going through and sort of how we've approached it. It is a really hot topic at the moment.
That's a great perspective. I love it. You want to deploy your technology as fast as possible, faster than your competition, but it comes with great responsibility. You have to deploy it responsible. You have to, start with first principles. You want to, instead of waiting to automate after you've deployed all the tech, you want to have automation is one of your guiding principles from the very beginning. And that way it's harder at first. You don't get there as fast in the very beginning. Short term might be, be a little rougher, but long term, it pays dividends hand over foot. So.
Well, and for me, the big takeaway is that it's all cyclical, and you have to understand the cycle and not get too invested in any particular phase of the cycle that's going to harm you when the pendulum swings the other direction, right?
Yeah.
You got to be aware enough not to go too far either direction. So
it's a constant balancing act.
Yeah.
And then what do you do if it does change, and is that within your control? And if it does change, you've got to be quick. You've got to make sure you've got time to do it. And to your point, just don't go too hard either which way. You'll sort of, It's a great chat, team. We really appreciate you making
Really appreciate your time.
So other than the podcast, by the way, which I'll link in the show notes, you have a great podcast. I've been enjoying it. Where can folks find you?
Oh, probably LinkedIn is probably the easiest way. I consume a bit of Twitter, but I don't do much on Twitter. And so, LinkedIn is probably the easiest one. And Alexis works for us. I don't know if you know Alexis. So every now and then, yes, she's everywhere. So I try to follow her everywhere. So TikTok.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, I know she's everywhere. So yeah, no, for me, easiest one's LinkedIn, or just ping me a note and I'll usually respond pretty quickly.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We appreciate the time.